Your turn. Before she said turn. It wasn't that bad. I'm just making your turn. It came back. No, you
All right, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. If I can get the microphone. There we go. You hear this now?
Say that and then like.
Right. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for coming out to Arvada today. I've heard that this was sort of an easy place for people to get to, which is kind of nice to avoid downtown once in a while. It's really hard for me to look at the screen and see that it's September 5th. It's shocking to be in this new month, but thank you all for coming today. So we have a pretty full agenda for the day. Before we get started, just so that you know, restrooms are out these doors and down to the left. In terms of mics for the day, Robert, he has a lavalier, so he has a live mic that we can share as needed. This one is working to project into the room. These pods that you see on the tables are what people get to hear for Zoom. So we're going to do a little sound check with those on the line to make sure they can hear us okay. I think if we're using the mics, they probably will. If not, in conversation around the table, we might need to boom. I'll try to pass the mic and then think about pointing your projection towards those pods. I think that would be helpful. And I can move mine out at least to closer to the center to see if that's helpful. The other request for getting across subcommittees for people who are joining by Zoom, for those in the room, they can't see you when your name tag, so if people can try to get in the habit of saying who you are before you speak. I know that's kind of something we don't always remember to do. We may remind you today as we go. It helps people who are joining by Zoom just know who's talking. And I think those are kind of the high level housekeeping items. So I'll pass to Robert just to say hello and we can do some introductions around the room.
Sure.
He's saying hello.
I'm saying we could skip the hello and go straight to the introduction.
Okay. So we can just do quick introductions. I think we're all kind of getting to know each other, but it's helpful to just do name, organization, and just sort of check in for the day. So Clint, do you mind, since I'm looking straight at you, do you mind starting? We'll just go around the room. And I will pass, we can pass this microphone. That would be helpful.
Hey, I'm Clint Gray, Dr. Gray. I'm the medical director of Cedar Springs Hospital down in Colorado Springs.
I am Marilyn Fawcett. I'm a parent advocate. I have an adult son in getting developmental disability services.
I am Tracy Bradford Walker. I am a probation officer with the City of Aurora.
I am Dr. Thomas Manzion, clinical director at Detention Homes.
I'm Deb Rotenberg. I'm the director of Grand and Jackson County Human Services.
I'm Sarah Bain, Assistant County Manager for Summit County Government.
Aubrey Boggs, and I'm the Ombudsman for Behavioral Health Access to Care.
I'm Carl Faro. I'm a researcher and mental health provider.
I'm Kiara Kunstler. I'm the CEO at Jefferson Center.
I'm Robert Work, Director of Pediatric Behavioral Health. Aubrey, congratulations on the Ombudsman job.
Summer Gathercole, Senior Advisor for the Behavioral Health Task Force.
Joy Hart, Chief of Behavioral Health Services for the Colorado Department of Corrections.
Melissa Edelman, Behavioral Health and Managed Care for the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing.
I'm Melissa George. I'm the Director for the Division of Housing and DOLA.
I'm Rick Sims. I'm a financial advisor.
Lauren Steiger, State Policy Director with Mental Health Colorado.
Boo Dijon with the Farley Center. I am with the Farley Center, and we will go to Zoom, and I will call you, and you can unmute yourself and say hello. So we have Aisha Rousseau. You know, Mike's joining a little bit late. Eva, can you hear us?
How about that? I was talking to myself on mute. Yes, thank you. Aisha Rousseau, Director of the Office of Disability Rights for the City and County of Denver.
Welcome. Eva? May also be muted. What about Jessica?
Hudson County Department of Public Health and Environment.
Jessica, and Megan.
Thank you.
Megan Lovelace at the Colorado Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health and Living Experience with a young person who's a 3-time suicide survivor.
Megan. Any other members of the subcommittee on the Zoom line?
Hi, Kim Gonzalez with the Los Animas Huerfano County District Health Department, Public Health Director.
Hi, Kim.
Hi.
Hi, Amber Pace, Director of Integrated Behavioral Health with Centura.
Great.
So for those of you on Zoom, you can see some of the instructions we put up on the slide. I'm sure you're getting tired of looking at this in every subcommittee, but we will be working in small groups later on this afternoon, and I'm hoping that Zoom will just put you into one since it's a relatively compact group, and Emma will be there to monitor it. So if you have questions, I think the easiest way to get a hold of us is through the chat, and Emma is monitoring that, and you can also just unmute yourself and start being loud, and we'll stop what we're doing so that we can hear you and include you. So thank you for joining. So our objectives for the day, many of you completed our survey this week, and we appreciate you taking the time to do that. We're going to really try to finalize the safety net definition. I also want to say I'm really, really happy and proud of myself that these are not the long-term competency slides, because I put out the long-term competency name tags when I walked in, because we have that meeting tomorrow. So this is making me feel better. So we're going to get this definition hammered down. And then really move into a timeline and roadmap that Summer has started creating, and we built out into a couple of slides to share, so we can start to really think about how this work is going to progress over the next several months together. And then we're going to start diving into safety net continuum of services and look at some examples of continuums that we've seen in other states, one that's been shared from within Colorado, and really start thinking about how we can start describing safety net services in the state. And start to really pivot away from definition and into more of the meat of what this subcommittee will be thinking about over the next several months together. So we do need to approve the minutes. You have got copies of this that make me feel guilty that we print them, but there are copies here. They are also available on the website, so we can access them between meeting sections, and really, really good about getting them out quickly. So are there any corrections to the minutes that anyone wants to submit?
We have a motion for approval of minutes. Second.
Second. All right, so the minutes are approved. I think we're good. If you're having any problem accessing any of this stuff online, please let us know. We can make sure that whatever is glitching gets fixed for you. So everybody's favorite topic, we're back to the safety net definition. So I want to first thank you again for taking the time to complete the survey. It was really helpful to be able to get as many people as has had time included in some input around this definition, and also for us to be able to start kind of wordsmithing a little bit on your behalf and moving some things around. So this is the word cloud that I created last time we were together, and this really hasn't changed. I mean, these are still the words that pop out, I think, most prominently as everyone's trying to describe what they mean when they're talking about safety net, at least from this subcommittee. But I just like it, so I wanted to bring it again today. There were 25 respondents, and I might pass to Emma because she was the one that really did the metrics on and kind of coordinating all the stuff that came in, and then she can pass back to me and we can get into some discussion.
Sure, thanks. So that's right. So we had 25 respondents, which out of our group is a great response rate. So thank you for your attention to that. We'll be using surveys throughout the process as a way to collect and collate feedback. And so I hope it was an okay process and that Qualtrics worked for you all. So if you'll remember, at our kickoff meeting, we worked in some small groups to start to put down definitions. And then at our last meeting, we brought back a revised definition, looked at some of the definitions of the safety net systems from other states and organizations, and then had an opportunity to provide more detailed feedback through the survey. And so the response was, 8 of you, so about 32% said, yep, I can get behind this, no more changes. 13 of you, about 52%, said, we're getting close, but I have a few more revisions to make. And then we had 4 people who said, hold the phone, significant changes are needed. And for both the getting close and significant changes are needed, there was an opportunity to fill in your additional thoughts. And so what we ended up with, and you have a handout in your packet so you can look at it kind of all at once in a one sheet, is we ended up, so part of the feedback that we're hearing is that trying to pack everything into the definition of a safety net system was getting pretty convoluted and complicated. And so we ended up trying to simplify the statement, that's the definition, and then having a series of principles and supporting values that would be a companion to this definition. And so on your handout, you can see it all together, and we'll walk through it as it is.
And so when I was working and diving into the survey responses and trying to really synthesize what you all shared, we took out, anytime there's something that you're going to see reflected in the values and principles that were underlying, we took out of the main definition so that we could avoid redundancy and simplify and shorten the actual definition. And then what we did to get to organizing is went back to the vision from the main task force that they are working from to kind of bucket these values and principles that sort of drive and live underneath the main definition. So if this seems like kind of a serious right turn, it's because we tried to recategorize some things.
Another area of feedback from quite a few subcommittee members was around our trying to hone in on the population that the safety net system serves. So I think in our last draft, we had language like vulnerable and at risk, and there was some calls to change that. And so the current revision has marginalized populations, and some of you offered suggestions to use that term, and that it really kind of puts the burden of seeking services on the provider as opposed to those who are accepting services. And so that, the main group has marginalized these subpopulations who are in need of additional supports and services.
Are you asking for feedback?
I think we'll run through kind of this first, and we're gonna, because I think there was a lot of wordsmithing, and I think that's where the majority of those that wanted revision, it was just around a word moved or something revamped. And so this is what we kind of came up with and trying to reconsider that. And then moving things into the values. And I think this subcommittee today really needs to get at what do we mean by the who. Who is part of the safety net, who needs to be received and caught in the safety net, and how do we want to describe them? So a couple of things, that's where we'll point discussion in a couple of minutes, but just to give you some ideas of language that I saw high risk, I saw most vulnerable, marginalized, and I think all of them kind of made me a little uncomfortable. So I think there's going to be a story and a support for all of those, and today what we really need to do is come up with the word that we can live with and then really describe what we mean by that. So we'll spend a little time doing that. I want to share with you though the values so that you can kind of, because I think this is really where you gave us the most feedback, was around locally driven, community-based, culturally informed, that addresses social determinants of health, provides a continuum of care. And so we try to lump these things under comprehensive. So that's one of the big buckets for the behavioral health task force vision. So it's comprehensive, equitable, and effective were the three big buckets. And so we just moved them into that because we're lumpers. The whole Farley Center team tends to do that instead of kind of having them be disparate. And then under equitable, things around inclusive, culturally and linguistically responsive, trauma-informed, patient autonomy, equitable access. So there's a redundancy to behavioral health services across the state. And these are in your handout, so you can read them. I know I'm talking fast because I want to get you to talk. And then effective, around evidence-informed, timely responsive, committed to high level of quality and patient satisfaction. So those, we can move them if you think they belong in a different bucket, that's up for grabs too. But I think, and I'm going to kick it to Robert here in a second to kind of give us a little framing as well. What we really need to be able to understand and to get this definition nailed down is something that more of us can get behind is really who is it? Because we've gone from all Coloradans to vulnerable, to marginalized, and what do we mean by that? And then what are we going to stick with? And the rest of it, I feel like we're pretty close. I think most everyone's words who responded to the survey were there. If you didn't have a chance to do it, put them in the parking lot now, and we can take them home and make sure they're incorporated. So Robert, do you want to just give us a little context around the who and this population question that we seem to be grappling with?
Well, if you go to the next slide.
Yeah.
And on the back of your definition handout is what you all reported to that survey question.
So I think who needs to be a group conversation, but I think we start with what you have here. So we have who needs services cannot access them from, well, I think you already established the definition that payment shouldn't be an issue. So I think what we can all agree upon was what is in sort of the existing population to start from is Medicaid. Medicaid is an existing population in the national or the historical definition of safety net. So I think that's one population. I don't know if anybody disagrees that Medicaid should not be considered.
Robert, I don't think the mic is picking you up. Sorry.
I don't know if, I think we all, is that better? I think we can agree with that population. Then there's the uninsured who have no insurance at all. Anybody disagree that it's not that population? I'm trying to start with the easy populations first before we get into others.
Chronic mental illness who got approved for Social Security disability benefits through the federal government and other on Medicare. So if they have Medicare and they don't have Medicaid or whatever,
Yeah.
then sometimes that affects how they access services.
Yeah. So I'm not hearing any disagreement to Medicaid uninsured so far. Then we can just jump into the chronically the people that are chronically ill, even though they're on Medicare because their age. All right. So and then those that are on Medicare not because they're age. Well, the question is the question for your group is do you want to consider all people on Medicare and safety net or just those that are chronically ill on Medicare?
Well, I was just going to ask, because I think of the safety net as anyone who's fallen through some cracks somewhere. And if you list out all the populations, it's hard to come up with every person who could be missed. Is there a reason why you can't just be all Coloradans or everyone rather than listing out every population that you think is most at risk?
Well, because I don't think we're saying behavioral health system, we're saying safety net system. So what does that mean? I think if you say all Coloradans, then when you get into scope of developing a system, where do you stop?
Right. I just think of the safety net as catching, whether it's healthcare safety net, behavioral health safety net, it's catching the people that for some reason can't get plugged in properly. And there's a lot of people that may not fit into these categories that could fall through a crack somewhere.
Yeah, and I think that's where we ended this conversation. And I know it was hard, Robert. You were channeling you that day, but that is for the purposes of the work that this subcommittee is tasked with. Are we talking about all Coloradans who may slip through the cracks at some point, or are we trying to narrow? And there's an argument both ways, but this subcommittee needs to decide what it means to with this hat on.
I think one of the languages I sent you in my survey was the word willing, right? So individuals that are willing to engage in services. I mean, I know that gets tricky with some of these other populations. So I'm trying to think about people that are affluent and have access to care. Do we consider them part of the safety net system? And do we need to build a system that accounts for that? I'm thinking sort of multiple steps ahead of what's the scope of the system we need to define is built as, is capturing. If it is all Colorado, then we are talking about a pretty big net. And where does that net work and what's the expectations there? So I agree with you to an extent. I agree with you. And then for me, it's like, well, there are other behavioral health systems in Colorado, and what is that mix?
This is Lauren with Federal Colorado. I mean, I think we try and build a system where those other systems work, right? Private pay, etc. And that's the first step that people go through is through either private pay or other systems. But if that doesn't work, we need to make sure that there's something there for everyone who's got high deductible plans, or maybe you do have a lot of money, but you still need to send your kid out of state, especially a provider that's willing to take your insurance. Like we still need to be there for those kids, right? So I agree with the all Coloradans, but that we build a system that safety net isn't the first stop. I don't know if that makes sense.
I wonder if it would make sense to include all Coloradans in the definition, and then underneath in the principles and supporting values that we, prioritize those who have the most need, if that would make sense. Because I do think like people who don't have mental health conditions diagnosed currently could end up in a crisis in the future. The assumption that any of us are invulnerable to crisis or needing that kind of support is, I think, one of the reasons a lot of people don't seek support before they get to that crisis point. And that there are going to be folks who, whether they have a lot of privilege or not, will end up not fitting into a definition that's more narrow. But if we define that we want to prioritize those who need it the most, basically, that maybe that would be a way to go, and the underlying principles and supporting values.
I'll say her hand up and then we'll move to Marilyn. Go ahead.
So what Aubrey was saying, I mean, it is for all Coloradans. It's just that not all Coloradans actually might need it today, but at some point during their lives. And so when I looked at the question, I identified areas where you can see those higher risk situations or people that might need that safety net at that time. And so looking at the school to prison pipeline, those were comments that I was making because that's where I saw that our effort should be identifying when someone needs that help.
I kind of see this as we have a safety net, and if you can visualize it, there's some holes in it that people are falling into, but we have that whole safety net. I mean, part of the safety net might be the counselors in a high school, because I know our local high school had a suicide last year. We want to get to those people. I mean, where they fit in. It's an affluent high school, but those kids are in trouble. So our job is to make sure everything's set up, but then maybe we want to tackle and pinpoint where the holes are. And that still means there's a safety net for everybody. I say everybody, but then who's falling into it and who's falling through the holes?
I think the other thing to consider is that there is a children's subcommittee. So I think so for safety net purposes, that might be a way we can at least put that one into that bucket. And Summer and I have been talking about the need for potentially those two subcommittees to work together or meet together at some point down the road to kind of see how it's overlapping. But I think the kids piece will be in depth covered. Wouldn't you say, Summer?
Yeah, I mean, I think at some point we'll bring everyone together because there's overlap across all the committees. But yeah, I think for the purposes of this group, let's not necessarily focus on children and youth aspect of it because that will cover that in the children's subcommittee, knowing that there's overlap.
I think too, this is Kiara Kunstler. I think too, part of the safety net system is how we create a system that allows people to navigate between those various services and resources if their ability to pay changes or their insurance or coverage changes. I know that there are gaps in all of those different parts of the system, but what I hear frequently from families is that they had a really hard time accessing services when they had private insurance for their adult family members and had to get them on Medicaid in order for them to access some services. And so how do we help make sure that resources are available and connect people with the right resources at the right time across multiple systems?
See, this is where I struggle. Philosophically, I agree. But then I also feel like we're bailing out companies or insurance companies or networks that have a charge to build these systems who are refusing to do it. And this is where I struggle with, where we go with this, right? Are we giving a pass to all the other systems that are we disincentivizing others that are responsible for payers from building a system to provide as well? If we create a safety net that covers everybody.
Robert, I agree with you, but if the work of this subcommittee could be in identifying that people are falling through the cracks because of a particular system that's not doing their job. then I think that that's success.
And for me, Melissa Edelman with HICPUF, I think there's certain systems that do better in other things, and there's almost like a collaboration and a streamlining of efforts. I think of economy of scales, especially in rural areas. One commercial health plan isn't going to support an entire behavioral health system. We need Medicaid, we need Medicare, we need the Office of Behavioral Health to kind of like support those efforts in a line. And so maybe some of it is not necessarily so population focused, but maybe it's problem focused. In my head, I go immediately to like essential health care benefits. Everyone should have access to crisis services, screenings, assessments, referrals, social determinant services. How do I get a SNAP benefit? Like that kind of coordination into those larger systems that then we're maybe identifying where there are gaps in certain types of providers or gaps in the state where we need to put money towards building telehealth infrastructure so that we're supporting an entire system, because we can't just depend on commercial or Medicaid to do this alone.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I'm trying to think a couple of steps ahead, and I'm saying a little bit of a devil's advocate because I do agree to an extent to what everybody's saying. I just trying to play multiple steps ahead when we start talking about what the system looks like. And then we have to cost control. There's not unlimited amount of funds. I mean, Safety Net came out of the definition for Medicare or Medicaid, right? And that's how the concept started. Now, their focus was, again, too narrow, so we want to make sure we're not missing populations, particularly in Colorado with the underinsured, right? Your copays being too high that you don't even bother getting services. I'm just trying to think multiple steps ahead about what does that mean, right? What does it mean when we say all Coloradans, and what the impact could be when we say if we were to advise on creating a system that catches everybody, do we disincentivize others? And maybe there's a way to correct for any potential disincentives, such as charging if somebody has insurance, working with division insurance, and can you mandate a charge to those other payers if you end up using a safety net system, so that it's not all on the taxpayer to build a safety net system.
For fines, I don't know what you want.
Yeah, clients, yeah.
Not fines, but I don't know. Yes, or people are paying in basically in order to support the safety net system, whether it's like some type of tax or whatever on commercial insurance. I don't know. And I agree with you that I feel like when I read this, we're biting off a lot. Like, how do you focus this? I think that there's a lot of just like service gaps that are just kind of occurring. It's not like a funding source issue necessarily. We just don't have certain resources in the state pervasively. Like everyone likes to talk about child psychiatry. We don't have a ton of child psychiatrists in the state. What are we doing for capacity building efforts there that supports both the commercial insurance effort as well as the Medicaid and Medicare kind of effort? And I understand that maybe today the foothold in the safety net kind of understanding is maybe with Medicaid, but I would argue with that. Like, we've been grappling with this issue with different provider types for years. That's why we have FQHCs, RHCs, community mental health centers. Their initial infrastructure kind of came out of that kind of safety net community supporting system. And then some of the folks there happen to be eligible for Medicaid.
I think this is Kiara again. Robert, where you got to at the end of your last comment, I think is right on. And when we're thinking about the system that we want to create, we're going to come up with different tools to get us there. And some of those are resources that the state puts in, and some of those are leverage points that the state enacts through policy, legislation, all of those things that you were describing. And so I think the tools will be different, so that it doesn't mean that we're responsible for providing all of that as a state, but that there's different tools to get us there.
Clint, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
I support the current definition of marginalized, and here's my reasoning. I think there's hundreds of services in place currently that are baseline filter. And so you pour the water through the filter, and those current systems are going to catch a lot of people. And so my idea of safety net would be, so what drips out the bottom are the ones that were the safety net. And so do we need to re-pour them through a different filter? I think it's easier to be pragmatic too, is you can do your funnel. So if they come to the filter and the person that is filtering out because they don't have money, well, then we can devise a funnel for people that don't have money, and we can be really specific and task oriented, or they come to the filter and the problem is they're a felon, you know, blah, blah, blah. So for me being really pragmatic, I like the marginalized idea because there's lots of people that are going to be caught already. And I think it helps us be more pragmatic at the end and say, okay, so who's coming to the filter now? And then we do funding streams. And sometimes 2 small filters can go into big ones. So we have a Medicare, Medicaid filter. So I kind of like the smaller instead of all Coloradans because we don't want people that are already being caught in the filter. I don't need to treat them. They're saying they're already getting care.
I think that's still us building a system that's like, you have to check all these boxes in order to get services. That's not like looking at just a person being a person, like I need services now and I'm not getting my needs met. I could be seeing a provider, but they're only seeing me once a week and I need something more.
So then we go to the filter, under kind of my visual models. The people that get caught by the filter, I don't need to see them. The housewife, you know, the librarian starts having panic attacks, family practice, and gets treated. We don't need a safety net for that person. They're getting care. But if she went through the filter for whatever reason, then we could identify why is she going through the filter and what services do we need to help that.
So can I add?
They're
Yeah, and I,
Allison, Sarah, and then Richard. Go ahead.
So my concern, I think, with defining it too small is, and I guess that, you know, in coming from housing and working with Department of Corrections and working with the jail system, our jail system has basically taken the place of mental health institutions. So I don't want to see our judicial system being that safety net, which I believe has essentially been the case. And so I was excited to be appointed to this committee because I thought, let's tackle some big issues. And so I was really looking at that judicial system and the interaction of people with behavioral health. I mean, Joy, is it 60, 70%?
It's too much. But I have to agree. It's like, are we just going to fortify the safety net that's there, make the holes smaller, or are we going to prevent people from meeting a safety net? And I really thought the system approach, looking at it before the safety net, can we improve the system, access what they're getting, who and where before they even fall?
I guess in terms of the definition, my concern about marginalized or some of these other pieces is that there's a lot of people who don't self-identify that way or who won't see themselves. I mean, there's people who fit the definition of homeless, but would never call themselves homeless. You know, they're living with family members or they're moving around. And so the more you outline it, the more danger there is of people not being able to see themselves in the list. And I think if someone doesn't fall through the filter, they're not going to seek services through the safety net. If someone's needs are being met, if they have a provider, if they're doing okay, they're not going to be grappling for the safety net at that point. So I'm wondering if, to your point, Robert, if there's a way to call out some of those pieces. You know, the expectation is that the system is working in a particular way, that payers are paying the way they're supposed to be paying, that there's a level of accountability for the system, rather than naming all the people that fall through the safety net, which just feels kind of icky.
Yeah, and I think that this will take us into the discussion later on this afternoon about what the system looks like, and that might further inform definition. But I'm wondering if I can propose like a happy medium.
I really want to give Richard a chance to.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say, speaking, since I'm on the task force, speaking to friends, many situations where they had a crisis and it's taken them a month to get, and they have good insurance. And they call the 10 people that the insurance company and nobody's taking any patients. So they need a safety net too.
Well, so the job I have now, I testified for the bill that created it years ago because they know it's going to be getting a job or applying for it, but because I had tried to get access through my insurance. I mean, I'm, pretty privileged, live a comfortable life, should be able to access that. And I called over 50 providers who were listed as accepting new patients in network. And none of them could take me for various reasons, which I'm hoping through this position can be able to start fixing some of that and provide some accountability. But I should be a person who doesn't meet the safety net. And in the end, I just stopped looking. Luckily, I had the support around me to be able to stay well. But I think that that is a lot of people. And especially, I mean, most of us in this room know more about the system than the average person. So considering someone who knows nothing about how the behavioral health system works, they're going to give up. And then those people, a lot of times they die. And I think that any system we build has to ensure that like zero deaths should be our number one goal. And I think that that has to really include everyone.
There are the crisis intervention centers. A lot of people don't know about that too, but I mean, it's what, 23 hours, 59 minutes and 59 seconds, because they can't hold anybody for 24 hours. But it is a way that people can get immediate help. Then what do they go from there? So
we have a few comments from Zoom participants. So one is that marginalized populations do not have the same access because of institutionalized racism and poverty leads to that lack of access. Also a suggestion that this could be a good conversation to have with Colorado Crisis Services, since that aims to provide supports to all Coloradans who are experiencing mental and behavioral health crises regardless of payer type. Also that telehealth is not sufficient. And just a reminder to say your name before you speak. I saw that comment. And I think that's it right now.
I'm hearing, this is Robert, I'm hearing a desire to back off the population part. It still raises a question mark on the word marginalized. Outside of population and marginalized, is there anything else in the definition that really people are struggling with? Lauren?
So I have, hey Lauren, can you say your name? Sorry, Lauren, Colorado. 2 different points. So when we look at the principles and supporting values that are equitable, there's patient autonomy, patient choice, client-driven, but then in the definition, we're talking about person-centered. I feel like person-centered and like person-driven are 2 very different things, and I would rather us see a person-driven system rather than a person-centered. Like we're building a system for clients, for people. They should be determining what they want and what they need, and we should make the system react to that. So I would like to see a person-driven language instead of person-centered. Nothing in there I thought about quality. I think is really important. And then I guess I'm more of a question, and maybe this goes back to what we were talking about regardless of payer type. Does that include regardless of system involvement, right? If you have IDD, are you going to enter the safety net system and they say, oh, wrong system, go back over there? Like, can we say something about, regardless of what bucket you fit into, you'll have a safety net? I don't know if that makes sense, but like somebody else is responsible for paying for you, and so you can't get services here.
I think we're absolutely going to address that problem at some point about the not it game, because I think that's a big part of why people are falling through the cracks. So I do think we'll get there. I think it's more of a structure question, and but I'm just, to what extent on the patient driven? I mean, from a clinical perspective, are we to assume that the patient always knows what's the best service for them?
Yes, I would absolutely argue that as a person with mental health conditions. I think that's one of the biggest issues with our system is that we generally default to this person does not know what's best for them. I think that the assumption is we have to, like when we talk about safety, we're generally talking about safety for everyone else and not the people in the system. Those people need to be safe too, and I think that their civil rights is part of that, as well as their ability to make decisions for themselves. I understand that our system doesn't always lean in that direction, and there's still going to be things that happen where people have decisions made for them. But I think that patient-driven is much better than patient-centered, because I think for a lot of folks, they take that to mean, as long as I'm focused on this patient, that means I'm patient-centered, as opposed to what does this person want? What are they saying is best for them? And I do think that, I don't know, I get the clinical perspective, but I don't think that that's always a correct perspective for folks.
And I guess I'm thinking about patient-driven different than you are. I agree on you get input. I'm thinking even for myself or any kind of healthcare, I don't get to decide all the services that come to me unless I want to pay for all of them. right? So what does that look like, right? Because you could decide. Well, perfect example. Some people might decide that they want inpatient care, but from a payer standpoint, there's a lot of checks and balances of, okay, does this person need payer? Not that you should ignore what that person's saying they need or what they want or where they're at and what they're feeling, but there has to be some cost control as well.
This is Melissa Edelman with Medicaid, and I just amplify that.
I can't hear you.
This is Melissa Edelman with Medicaid, and I amplify that. As a payer, we have federal restrictions on what we can pay for. That's based on medical necessity, which may not always be what a member wants, but it's what we're able to cover and what meets our medical necessity criteria. And then also we have like restrictions around things that are like evidence-based or FDA approved. And so I think that those are some real considerations that we have to keep in mind as well.
This is Lauren. I think my comment was, I think person-driven, client-driven should be where we start. And we're not saying the system just needs to pay for everything that somebody may want, but we should always come to the table meeting somebody, listening to them, and taking into what they want, like as a first step. And I think saying patient-driven gets to that rather than person-centered. Because person-centered just tends to be a language that sometimes gets thrown around, but driven is kind of transformational, and that's why we're all here. There's a lot of providers here. We have one person with lived experience. I think it's important for us to represent who we're building this system for. So,
and Aubrey Boggs, just to add to that, yeah, I mean, like I know people are still going to have their civil rights stripped. They're still going to be put on hold. They're still going to be in situations where they literally have no choice. It happens every day. It's usually pretty awful for folks. Those things are still going to happen whether we want them to or not. I wish we had a system that could pay for exactly what a person knows they want, but our starting point and our default should always be, what does this person need? What are they saying they need? And listening to them first, and then working that out as best we can. I don't think saying person-driven means, yeah, that you're just going to have to pay for everything, regardless of whatever the restrictions are on that. I think it's just trying to start from that point.
We have a question. 2 hands up over there, and then
we have one on the phone too.
And then well, 2 hands, then one on the phone, and then I think maybe we could poll. I think there's an agreement either between patient-centered, patient-driven, and we could poll the committee and they could decide on which one they want. I think everybody agrees there should be some kind of patient-focused or patient something, hyphenated something, and we're between those two, and the group can vote on those two, not that we're going to change anything drastically beyond that. I'm trying to get us to a final definition.
Yeah, and if there's a way we can do that today, that would be incredible, because it's really, otherwise we come back to this in 2 weeks, that'd be great. The other thing that I would propose is that I think that the definition, just from our experience in other states, if we don't define a who, it's going to get really, really hard for us to use this as a North Star. So my proposal is that we leave in all Coloradans with a prioritization of those that are the most marginalized or most vulnerable, whatever word we decide to put in there, so that we can kind of, we just need to create the lens in which we approach the work, because that would then trickle up, can you trickle up to all Coloradans? Because if we just take it out, I think we're going to regret it in 3 months that we don't have something. We've seen this go down before.
Give you a 2 right there.
Marilyn Fawcett, I feel like we need to add something like as needed, because it seems like am I talking?
Somebody on the phone. Sorry, Marilyn. Keep going. We'll fix it.
The issue is the services are there, but you can't get to them when you need them. So you need it when you're arrested, possibly. You need them when you're in crisis. So I don't even know why we need them. That's my opinion. That provides as needed access. People need to have it as they need it. And that's the issue here. You wait 3-4 months. I put it off for years getting my son evaluated because it was going to cost me several $1,000s and I have insurance. So you need it when you need it. And I think it's as needed. That's our problem. It's there, but you can't get to it when you need it. So I'd like to add something like that. The person-centered, I think that's just, I'm not sure why you need that. but that's me.
I'll just add Aubrey Boggs again, as a person who could potentially fit the definition of this system, I would absolutely like my care to be centered on me as the person receiving help and driven by me as the person who knows what I need.
So we move forward. So yeah.
No fancy balls inside. Everyone has to hold on to them, okay? Got it?
I think that there's
Her child.
There's someone on the phone who is a mom. And if she could kindly mute her phone, that would be incredible. Thank you.
So we're gonna go here and then we're gonna go on the thing and then we're gonna vote.
We have a question about patient driven from Zoom person driven, asking if that accounts for what families of adult children with SPMI say they need.
And can I jump in? And
go ahead, Frank.
That was my question. Frank Cornelia with Colorado Behavioral Health Care Council. It was really illuminating to me to attend the first public testimony opportunity. And, you know, what I observed, and others in the room can probably speak to it, is that most of the testimony, and you know, it was only the first one, so small sample size, but most of the testimony and most of the complaints about our publicly funded system come from families who feel like there are barriers to accessing information. And so this whole client choice conversation is extremely important. I think part of what the missing element is, you get families, if a patient chooses not to, engage in a level of services that the family thinks that they want, I think you would get into a real, and we're gonna have a lot of conversations down the road about how to support families that are supporting children or adult children, and how do we balance
in the kitchen though, okay? We don't want to spill milk on the carpet because then
yeah.
A lot of noise in the room from a family in their kitchen. So if you could please mute your phone. I'm sorry to call you out like that, but it's creating some disruption in the room. So everyone just make sure that your phones and computers are muted, please.
Go ahead, Frank. Sorry.
I think I hope I got most of it out. It was just really, how do we balance person-driven, person-centered with what I think is a huge amount of probably appropriate criticism of different systems, is families that are trying to support adult children and they like they're encountering barrier after barrier in navigating or accessing services to try to support the care that they think the individual needs versus the person's individual belief about what might be best for them. I think that's a big conversation that this group is going to have. I don't know if I necessarily have a suggestion as far as the definition goes, but I guess I lean a little bit more person-centered versus person-driven, because I'm thinking about the families that testified a couple weeks ago.
We're going to move the claim, then we're going to vote.
This is Dr. Gray calling, and I agree with both concepts, and I take it from the outside as a provider viewpoint. And I wish there's a word that had both person-centered and patient-driven, because
hey, are you done?
So there's two separate concepts. I'm a forensic psychiatrist.
If you can hear us, please, if you have children in the background, it's very loud.
No, we can't. If we mute everybody, then nobody.
Everyone's showing as muted.
They can raise their hand.
There are a couple on here that don't have any
exactly
things. So if you are on, otherwise, I'll have to hang up and call back in. I mean, if we're gonna, because it's not going to be doable for people on the phone to keep getting that feedback. All right, I'm not hearing anything at the moment, so I'm hoping if you had kids in the room, you muted. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So the point is, I wish we had a word for both terms. So I'm the dude in the community that puts people on certs, and I'm in the private, and I take people to court, and I get court-ordered meds, and I restrict their civil rights, and I go to court and touch the judge. So my job is to take people's rights away from them. through the legal system. And that is definitely not a patient-driven course, it's a person-centered course. But I totally agree with the earlier comment about people should be person-centered. My concern is if we pick one or the other side loses. And I wish there was a word or phrase that someone smarter than me could think of where it can be both. Because sometimes you need to have one or the other, but in the majority of cases, it's the sine curve. 90% of the people are going to fall under both definitions.
I'm looking at synonyms.
Sorry?
I'm looking at synonyms.
Yeah, we need both.
I think, sorry, this is Lauren in Florida. I think one of those both sides has a statutory authority to restrict people's rights. The other side has no ability to have their care be person driven. So I'd rather start from that point. You always have that ability to do one, do short, long-term certifications on people. I feel a little uncomfortable about us voting on this if we don't actually maybe get some public comment on it and have people actually who may have experienced this system talk about why they think it's important for system building for them. So I would ask that maybe we hold off or do some wait the next meeting just on that language alone for the rest of the
I think we would have to talk to Robert and Nancy about how we're going to, what the process would be for getting that kind of input. We can certainly ask for it at the end of today when we open for public comment. But I also think you were chosen as a subcommittee to do the work. And so what this definition means to you, the work that needs to be done, I think is what we're trying to really define. So I can see it both ways, and Robert and Nancy will have to kind of figure that out. I don't know how to.
My boss is calling, but I agree because I think we can go multiple places. We will have an opportunity for consumers to come back and adjust things. Can we move to a different topic? I gotta take this.
So just while he's stepping out, what I would just share real quickly, and Camille, actually, you want to just jump in and share? Yeah.
Sorry, I was eating ice. Camille Harding, Office of Behavioral Health, and one of the concepts that you see a lot on physical health side is shared decision making, right? Which integrates in the patient's perspective and choice in healthcare delivery broadly, but also takes into account that sometimes, right, like you're gonna go against or need to go with what your provider's recommendations are, and so it's sort of that in between of both. So conceptually, the language in general is shared decision making. So if like we're grappling with patient-centered or that language, shared decision making is a pretty common term within healthcare delivery. That's inclusive of both.
Sorry to talk more. I just wanted to add one thing. Aubrey Boggs again. Just on Frank's comment, I think it's important to recognize that one of the reasons we're going to see so many family members who are showing up for public testimony is because people with mental health conditions don't feel safe or comfortable coming to things like this, talking about their lived experience. I used to help folks prepare testimony in my previous position. It was really hard to find folks who were comfortable telling their story because it automatically comes with stigma, the potential for discrimination. And I think we just need to take that into account, is that just because we're hearing mostly from families, it's a lot safer for a family member to talk about this than it is for a person with mental health conditions. I mean, even in this room, I have no doubt I'm not the only person with a diagnosed mental health condition, but there's a reason I'm the only person who's out about it, because my previous job required that I be out about it. So I think that's just important to take into consideration, is we're not going to hear from people with mental health conditions as much as we are others. That doesn't mean that they don't have concerns or opinions on this. It's just not necessarily safe for them to come out about that in public spaces.
And I agree that there will be an opportunity for input. I guess I would like us to have a more complete package before we ask for input from people outside the committee. I think it's our job to sort of put a rough draft together and let consumers, families, others at that point nitpick at it.
I think the key also is that not every situation is the same. And some people have a better situation for representing themselves in a different situation. I am a family member of a person with mental health schizophrenia. And it took the judicial system stepping in order to get that person stabilized. And so, we all are coming from our personal situations, and the safety net has to address each person and each person's needs where they are So I did synonyms, and I have a few that I like. Let's see. For driven, I thought piloted would be nice. Person piloted access. I know it's getting a little off of the mainstream language that you all use, but I don't use that language anyway. So
It sounds. I guess when I think of pilot, I think of
and okay, so you come from.
And Allison, if I could ask you to write these down on a sticky note in front of you, so then we'll have them.
I'll pass them down to you. Yes. Okay.
Or I can pick them up at the end.
Please give her the mic if she's going to be walking through these.
So steered, propelled, guided, directed, focused are just a few of the things that I came up when looking at synonyms, just to get away from those strict definitions that people are kind of going toward. So something that would be in between, I think, would be able to address a broader range of situations.
I'm honestly like, I'm open for any of it, honestly, because I think it's important. So people that it's important to, I think that the consumers, I think we define it as flex best. I want to just fix the system. So I'm open to any of those. I'm also open to just accepting the definition with the question mark with the hyphenated for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, that was the other thing I was thinking, if there's just a way to kind of put a pin in this and say, do we have enough of a definition to move forward into the next step of our work? And we can then revisit some of this once we get more out on the table. Might be a way to kind of just table it for a minute.
But it's not going to change, I think, the intent of everybody in the room with the intent to agree that the patient needs to be treated as the expert in their care. But there are exceptions to that rule when that happens. So,
Sarah Vane, I'm just thinking that, I mean, I think that the bigger point or hope is that those people that are struggling see themselves in the definition that we put out there, and that it makes them feel like we get it and that it's safe to access the safety net. Putting patient-driven doesn't change the rules around what Medicaid will pay for, what an insurer will pay for. Just because it's in there doesn't mean we're making a promise to people that, every single thing that they need or want is laid out on the carpet for them. I think what's most important is just that people feel connected and welcome and understood in whatever definition and language that we use.
So what about this? And feel free to not agree. I mean, I want everybody to feel safe to not agree. Can we just straw poll patient-driven? And maybe we have a majority already. There's no need to keep coming back to this. Or is everybody open to
just strong opinions one or the other? Because if 90% of people, it's not that important, let's move forward. Maybe pick the one that someone feels really strongly about.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm starting with. So the options, a straw poll and those on the phone. Maybe you could do a straw poll of those on the phone. Straw poll being this is not locked in. We can always come sort of talk about it. Nothing really is locked in. We can always come back as we learn more. But straw poll for who's in favor of patient-driven. Okay, so it does seem like we need more work on this. Even if all the people on the phone agree, I don't think we're quite there. So, so let's do patient hyphenated question mark in our definition, and we'll come back to it because I think it is a good conversation. I think maybe we'll learn more as we go through sort of the caveats of the system. I am pretty much hearing from the room though, and maybe we should take a quick show of hands that we want to go with all Coloradans and back off of population, with the caveat of my desire later talking about how we prioritize populations. So do we show of hands and we'll do on the phone as well, in support of the word all Coloradans instead of marginalized Coloradans? Okay. So we have like only two of us in the room that did not vote for it.
I'm just not voting.
Oh, you're not.
I'm not voting for it.
Okay. You're not voting for it.
I'm not voting, period.
Okay. What's that? Okay. Then what we have on the...
Eva and Amber both said all Coloradans. Frank said all. Michael said all.
So we have enough clearly for vote. So that, I think that's, everybody in the room agrees that the majority of folks agree that it should be all Coloradans. We'll make that adjustment. All right. I dare say, and I know I already got the 5-minute thing.
It's okay.
We are on a clock. Anything else that somebody absolutely wants to change? And this is my restraint. I have something I want to change, and I'm not going to get into it.
I also want to say that there's ways to get your feedback to us outside of here. It would be great if we can start to see how this applies to the work you want to do together.
I want to point out, I think we've got someone on the phone who wants to say something. Does Megan Lovelace want to weigh in?
I'm not seeing anything from Megan, but Megan, did you want to unmute?
Can you hear me? Hi, this is Megan Lovelace. I'm a member of the subcommittee, and I know we're moving on. I just wanted to speak to Frank's point earlier in regards to oftentimes, especially in rural, we will only see a provider for 5 to 10 minutes and get then, and then be told what services we need. So I think that's where you're hearing that disconnect, is we're living with it every day. And then we get to a provider finally, and they see us because they're overloaded for 5 to 10 minutes and then come down with the be all end all. And so I think that's why you're seeing that disconnect. And just to also say that marginalized is necessary if you are somebody who's living the experience. Thank you so much for including my voice over the phone.
Well, thank you for doing it over the phone. I know it's not the easiest thing to contribute by phone, so appreciate that. All right. Anybody else is absolutely feels like we need to change. And I did hear the word quality, and we will need to come back into values and stuff like that, because I guess that's where I always, I'm like, well, shouldn't it all be quality? And I understand it. That's a little Pollyanna, but of me. But so yeah, other things in the definition we absolutely feel like we need to address. And I'll get to why this definition of values is important, because we're going to get into parts of the system. We're going to start making recommendations, and we're going to have to self-reflect of, okay, the things we're throwing on the table, does it fit the values and the definition that we came up with? Are we staying? It's basically to keep us on course, because we could be talking about the entire behavioral health system, but our charge is the safety net system, which is a part of that behavioral health system. And I want to make sure we tackle the safety net and don't get lost in the larger system.
Okay, Robert, it'll be so fast. Just a question, I guess, clarifying. When we say behavioral health services, does that include things like housing, employment, non-treatment focused services? Because I didn't know if we need to include services and supports, or if services is inclusive of non-treatment options. Question.
Trying to find where there was.
Good question. I mean, a lot of things you listed are addressed. I'll go back. Sorry, are in the social determinants of health. A lot of things that you just listed. But you're talking about specifically when you take behavioral health services. I don't think of those other social determinants of health that people need to be successful. But I don't know how others feel about that.
Well, I talked to a friend that worked for Mental Health Partners in Boulder, and she said they always she worked there for years. They always would release people and they'd find them a place to live. And then the last few years, they just release them onto the street. Now that's obviously not going to lead to good behavioral health outcomes. So that was a question I was going to have, that if we just, and I know that, a lot of times these people have nowhere to live. It's all related.
It's related, but when we say behavioral health services, are we thinking housing?
Yes. See, I don't know.
I don't, because a lot of people need housing, not just folks that need behavioral health services. I wouldn't say that somebody needs housing who doesn't need behavioral health services, call their housing behavioral health services.
I also don't know that their behavioral health services are going to be successful if they're not housed.
That's a different question, though, of whether it's included in the word behavioral health. I mean, saying that behavioral health services need to address all social determinants of health to be successful is a different question than saying, is it behavioral health services?
This is Carlo Faro. I think it's important to focus again on like what you're saying, Robert, the behavioral health need, and recognize that people are existing in a community, are existing in systems. So I think it's a strong component of a safety net maybe to then reconnect people with systems that can meet their other needs. I'm a veteran, I represent veterans. I think about my work in community mental health, like we could try to meet all of their needs, try to get them to our agency's housing, when in fact there is a system that is there to address veterans' housing needs. So rather than duplicate, rather than in some ways use resources for people who can get them in another system, simply help them navigate toward systems that they can already access.
I think that would include support though. Like that's a support service to help someone get connected to wherever the housing service is.
Yeah.
I agree, we definitely shouldn't duplicate, spread pretty thin as is with the system we have, but I don't think most people get connected to those services. And someone might be doing great after maybe they're inpatient, they have a place to sleep, they have food. The second they go back out on the street, they're going to be pretty close to needing those services again. And a lot of times that's when suicidality might pop up, where someone gets suicidal because they've had these needs provided and then now they don't have them provided. And I think that does fall back on the behavioral health system. And if it's a safety net, it should be safe. And if we're letting people go into living on the street or in an abusive home, all those sorts of things. I mean, I'm not saying the system has to necessarily provide every single piece of that pie, but I think that the connection point should be assumed, and I don't think that happens. That's what I hear mostly from folks is they get, maybe if they are hospitalized, they maybe get a piece of paper that's like, call all these places. And when I was at the Colorado Mental Wellness Network, we were listed on there, even though we don't provide direct service outside of our one space that we, so it's not accurate. We would get crisis calls from folks because they couldn't find it elsewhere. And I do think that is a burden of the behavioral health system and the safety net system, and not just because there's other services that we just put that burden completely on them. We need to connect people to those services.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think most of us agree. That's why the addressing social determinants of health, which is all just comes back to those things. This question of whether we need that in the definition or we need that to be defined when we lay out the system. A responsibility of the system is to basically what you're saying is to connect services, looking holistically at a person versus.
Yeah.
So.
And I do think that should be part, just services and supports, and assuming that supports means connecting folks to those other systems of care.
Deb, you had your hand up.
No, I was going to say exactly what you said about the fact that it was written down in our principles and supporting values, because I think we really run the risk of trying to all of a sudden include everything that's in this bottom section back into the definition the longer we talk about the definition.
Music to Stephanie's ears.
What a service is that?
Yeah.
All right, we good for now? Anybody that has not spoken that wants a chance to speak, because I do want to make sure that I know I'm pretty vocal, and there's some of us in here are pretty vocal. There are those that are not. Want a chance to speak, I want to make sure we make that time, as well as for people on the phone. Anybody on the phone want to contribute?
They're piping in some comments in chat that I think we'll just include in the when we write this up, so that their stuff is there. I think they're okay.
So I think we have a definition with the hyphenated question mark, patient hyphenated question mark.
Partially hyphenated question mark.
Partially hyphenated question mark. And we'll readdress that.
Okay.
At that point.
Okay. I know this is taxing work, and it sometimes feels like we chase our tails a little bit, but it definitely will. You'll come back to this, I promise. We're going to talk a little bit in a minute about the continuum of services that we help to kind of flesh out in the state of Virginia. And this was something that they did not spend time doing up front. They did not sit down and kind of hash out really what this definition, they didn't want to do that. They wanted to jump right into the meat and potatoes. And I think the Farley Center learned a really valuable lesson with that. So we ended up coming back to this. So I think even though it may not be finalized, and we can keep kind of tweaking it and refining it as we go, it'll be a place where you remember these conversations and sort of what you decided was the North Star and the definition for the work of this committee. So thank you for your patience in getting it done.
And with that, I want to show you a new slide template with a timeline for the Safety Net subcommittee. So Summer, and please jump in anytime you want, because this is her, she is the one that started this, thankfully, and it's been really helpful for all 3 of the subcommittees to really start thinking how we can be strategic and what's going to be coming next. And I think what you'll see in here are echoes of the conversation that you've already had today, that will start to think about mapping out an array of services that we think fall within the safety net. Start thinking about where there are gaps and redundancies in that service array. Start thinking about who's accountable for it. How are we going to pay for it? How's it being done already? What's the ideal state? And then these things in this definition will start to bubble up and become more clear about what we need. So this is something that you'll have the slides that you'll have this to take and look at and reference as we move forward. It's not set in stone, because as you can see, even today, we took more time on something that we felt like needed more time, and so we're going to readjust. But this at least gives you a little bit of a roadmap through the end of the year, and we're working on this post-January. It's hard for my brain to go there right now because like I said, I brought the wrong name tags in for my car. But we are thinking about where this leads into February and March, when these recommendations out of this work start to really formulate, that it'll inform the work of the task force in creating the blueprint. So Summer, anything you want to add?
So what I would just add is that when putting this timeline together, there were 2 big things that we looked at. First was SB 222, to make sure that we're trying to stay in alignment. So for what I was just saying is that there are 2 things that we looked at when I started putting this together. One was looking at SB 222, the legislation that is, or the reason that this group is coming together, this subcommittee, so making sure that we're meeting the expectations outlined in that legislation, but also looking at what is the governor expecting us to deliver next June in the blueprint. So trying to make sure that we're being really forward thinking about that, and then putting together enough of a framework, hopefully by the end of this year, so that we have something throughout the January, February, and March to kind of poke holes in, figure out where we want to make changes and tweaks and so forth, so that we have a lot of time. So we're not rushing at the end. What we're trying to avoid is on May 30th, we're all staying up overnight to try to finish a plan that we're trying to deliver to the governor. So I'm trying to be thoughtful about how do we make sure that we're moving things forward in a timeline that will allow us to have this time to have these types of debates and conversations that are really important. Any questions? Great, and we will share the slide deck so everyone has this time frame.
And I also wanted to point out just some of the underlying places that I pulled some things out of the document that Summer shared with the Farley Center that kind of run throughout. And we had speakers come from to discuss Medicaid and parity in Colorado, to the Maine task force meeting. And there's places where we want to start plugging that in to better understand how this overlays with the work of the Safety Net subcommittee. We can build that in across whenever it makes the most sense, and also just constantly looking for best practices in other states that we can use to inform the work here and compare and contrast, and also, like Summer was saying, legislation that applies to work. So this was a really helpful exercise for me.
Before, can you just, I'm just going to ask Camille to talk about the case study real quick, just so everyone has that on. Sure.
Hi, Camille Hard, Division Director for Community Behavioral Health and Office of Behavioral Health. So the Office of Behavioral Health is conducting a population and needs study, which is required due to our federal block grant. And so one of the pieces of work that we're trying to make sure is coordinated with the task force work is making sure that you're included in the surveys and the information. So what they're doing preliminarily is really looking at all of the various reports that have been produced and various needs assessments and studies in different areas that have been produced over the last several years, consolidating it. They're putting together sort of a map of this is what we have good information about, this is what we don't have good information about. And then from there, they are going to start doing some focus groups and surveys. So we'll see those coming out so that they can fill in some of those holes and then start preliminarily making some recommendations about what the Office of Behavioral Health do in terms of our broad strategy work, and it will really be our strategy that informs the Office of Behavioral Health's work for the next several years and helps us identify how our funds that come from both state and federal resources are used over the course of the next several years. So I would just say, I think that some of the work that comes out of that is going to be really important to be informing not just the safety net and the task force overall. So I just want to make sure everyone is aware of that, and we will share that as we've got information coming in.
That's what I say, yes.
Following up, sorry. On the PIN study, one of the things this actually came out from Mental Health Colorado suggested it, Nancy Gunmark suggested that we, in our PIN study, and it's our goal to do this, hopefully, is what your workforce should look like based on population. So for every 100,000 people in your community, you should have X therapists, Y beds, you know, that kind of concept that could be applied to any community in Colorado, which is actually a really great idea. I wish we could take credit for it, but it was Nancy, Colorado, with that idea. So if they're able to do that, we're going to do that. I think that will help this group a lot to know, to sort of have, based on your community, what should your service capacity look like? Basically is what we're getting at, based on population size. And that is the all Coloradans question, right? So I just wanted to throw it out there because I think it's a pretty interesting concept that we're able to pull off.
So any questions about the timeline? A very fluid, yet not fluid timeline. Yeah, go ahead.
It's not a question about the timeline, it's a question about the study. When you say community, what do you mean by community? You know, is that a county?
My county probably. So based on the population in your county.
Okay.
It's really going to be, well, even more flexible than that. If we do it like as a per capita, you can define your community, right, as what you want the boundaries to be. We'll do it by county. But if you say for every 100,000 people, you should have X number and Y number, you can decide what that boundary looks like because you're just doing it as a program.
Okay. All right. So you can see under September 6th, we were going to work on this definition, introducing this roadmap, which is this, and then really kind of start thinking about a continuum of behavioral health services. And so I'm going to pass to Emma to describe some of the work that we have, just examples of continuum of services, things that we've seen and worked on in other states. There's an example from within Colorado that one of the subcommittee members, Mike Nugent, sent from Eagle County, that we wanted to make sure we shared just to kind of frame up what we mean by what is this array of services and what does this continuum look like that we're going to start to kind of segue at.
So part of the survey was asking for additional resources, frameworks, or models that could inform this work. So thank you to those who have shared, and for those who were in email communication to get those. Right now, we're going to be looking at it in kind of broad strokes, and so as we hone in on certain sections of the continuum, we'll revisit some of those resources that you shared where it makes the most sense. So we have always found that it's always best to start building from something that you can either totally tear apart or start building from. And so a lot of our work and work of SAMHSA and other county and nonprofit behavioral health organizations have adopted is the Institute of Medicine's behavioral health framework. And so this was established many years ago in 1994, but still is used actively and feels relevant for work today. And so this is just a base framework to think about the whole spectrum and continuum of services that a system might need, starting with promotion and then ranging from prevention, treatment to recovery. And then within that, getting a little bit more specific about what falls into making sure prevention services are targeted universally, as well as selected and indicated, the treatment options, and then recovery throughout. So in 2011, and I know you cannot see this, this is so tiny, and if you flipped the page of the handout, you're also not going to be very helpful either. We have little PC map communication issues, so we'll make sure that you can look at this. But SAMHSA built on to the IOM framework, more specificity about what those service categories are and what those services are within. And so it's impossible to see, but there's, listing under prevention is
SBIRT and brief motivational interviewing. Underneath outpatient services are evidence-based therapies, both individual and group settings, family therapies, and kind of across the spectrum to ending with intensive supports and recovery supports. So again, just a starting place that we can look at when we're thinking of our safety net system to cover continuum of services for what would be included. The Farley Center had the opportunity last year to work with the Virginia Medicaid and behavioral health agencies, and they were looking to redesign their Medicaid benefit and what were the behavioral health services to include in it. And so this is an example of a continuum of services that we wanted to share as another starting point, where we built on the IOM, the SAMHSA framework, looked at what the agencies were currently funding, and then identified gaps. Important to this was really looking across agencies to see where there were efforts that were already existing that could be built on and expanded and further supported, and then where there were just missing services that needed to have Medicaid support for, or if there was another federal or funding support that would fund those services.
The other thing I just want to point out from both of these examples is that the legislative review that was done and shared was really using that, we call it the IOM protractor. It's kind of, so that made us feel like, okay, this is grounding work. This is kind of something that can tie us back to the other agencies and other subcommittees and others in the state. But in particular in Virginia, they started with the protractor, and this is just an example of how we can localize the solution. They started calling things different things that were more relevant to the work in Virginia and just kind of their lingo and what they actually called things within these parts of the protractor. So you can see in here, the intensive community-based support and intensive clinic facility-based support and the services within them. So they really went a little bit more granular, which we can think about if that's a fit too, but it's just, it doesn't have, it can be adaptable, I guess is my point, that it's a framework to start kind of organizing and again, lumping some things together, but it can be specific to the language and what feels right for this community in Colorado.
It's always really challenging to capture a active living, breathing system full of people and processes on paper. And so that was, part of our attempt is having the service categories going across, color-coded to connect with actual individual service types along the bottom. But then some things that range across all services like behavioral therapy supports, case management, and recovery and rehabilitation support services. I believe Michael joined us. He had also shared with us some of the work that Eagle County has completed, and they had used a framework to guide their work as well with human services. So Mike, can I pass to you?
Sure, can you hear me okay?
Hear you great.
Great, Mike Nugent from CDPHE. Thanks for allowing me to share this. Just real quickly, context, I was the deputy county manager up in Eagle County before I came to the state with the new administration. And that community, over a period of 2 to 3 years, was suffering greatly from behavioral health system performance, a lack of access, and a dramatic rise in youth suicide. So it really was the #1 issue in the community. And so the county put together, we realized it was a multidisciplinary issue. We realized it was a complex issue. So we brought together, very similar to the state leadership on the issue right now, a multidisciplinary team comprised of local police chiefs, members from nonprofits, the major health systems were represented, the major federally qualified health centers were represented as per behavioral health providers. And we had a couple meetings and everybody shared great passion and stories and interest in the issue and a desire to impact it. But we really were missing a couple key components to move the vision of a well-resourced system forward. And having done healthcare system design in past positions I've had, and I've been trained to kind of think of healthcare in terms of value streams and kind of lean thinking. I felt like tackling this issue through a continuum of care visual would probably help us in a couple areas. I think we needed a common framework that allowed broad engagement from interested stakeholders. The continuum of care, whether it was law enforcement or outpatient behavioral health care or hospital services, everybody saw themselves in this model. So that was very helpful in keeping the group engaged and kind of on task. And we really wanted to make sure that we were taking a comprehensive approach. So we felt like the continuum of care was representative of that. We lacked a common language, and in particular about healthcare resource typing. Early on in our meetings, when we were trying to inventory the behavioral health assets in the community, people were using terms like provider, therapist, and counselor kind of synonymously. And again, didn't have a good feel for scope of practice and where they should be optimally positioned in the healthcare continuum. So, this is, I can't remember how many pages this document is, but by having the healthcare continuum as a framework, it allowed us to really get more specific on the role of human beings and providers in this system and where they should be positioned according to scope of practice. And, obviously this is a human issue, but we really looked at it through a healthcare production lens. And so, how large is the unmet need? What are the resources that are needed in all areas of the continuum? We identified gaps and shortfalls, and we really were intentional on how we would measure performance in each area of the continuum. So the weird thing about this also, and why it uses pretty simple language, and it's the visual is pretty simple, is because one of the goals of this group was to raise money, and we needed a plain language, highly visual representation of what a behavioral health system would look like in order to engage donors. And obviously based on their personal experience or interest, certain donors would be attracted to certain areas of the healthcare continuum. And ultimately, Vail Health jumped in with a $60 million contribution, and the group collectively had a goal of raising another $80 million. And so they've kind of used the continuum model for the behavioral health system to advance those efforts. So that's my experience with it. Thanks.
So does anyone have any questions for Mike about the specifics of this continuum that he built with his team? Nope.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It's for the Sims. So you've raised, and I was in Vail. I don't know. Maybe it was over in April, and that's when I think they announced this $60 million contribution. And I believe there's some really good sized family foundations that are also contributing to this. But so where is 140 million going to take care of the problem?
I would say probably not. But I think, and I haven't been there in 6 months. So, there's been other announcements. I know Vail Health formally formed a behavioral health service line. They have an executive director. So I wasn't as involved in the costing of what it would take to close the gaps and shortfalls in the system. But I do feel like whatever that price tag is or available resources, that this document would allow them to make informed investments. And that was something that we really didn't have.
It's a great.
This is Megan. May I interject over the phone? Megan Lovelace. I live in Eagle County, And most recently, my family experienced a crisis. My daughter was in crisis again. She's a suicide survivor. She's 8. And the executive director reported my family to child welfare so that they could access PA3 funding. I was told by the executive director that it was the only way to get money to help my family. Sorry, this is hard to say. So I just want to give you some perspective on how that program's working. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. I'm sure there is a lot of work to be done in this area. I can really only speak to the efficacy of the effort from the county's perspective in trying to put together a framework that allowed for broader engagement and a more thoughtful discussion on gaps, omissions, and where the investment should help. But I know that there's a ton of work left to be done up there. Absolutely.
And I know that the Children's Committee is addressing the unnecessary utilization of child welfare and access services for children's mental health. So they'll be addressing that as well.
I also wanted to say in Virginia, how many times did we hear them say there's no new money? There's no new money. I mean, every single time there was an issue about building out this continuum, it was all about how do we identify what's not working? How do we move money out of maybe away from the treatment side back to prevention? They didn't have anything to add. And so what they did with that happened after the Farley Center left. Like, the recommendations went about how things could be shifted. But part of this is trying to figure out where are there inefficiencies where funding could be reallocated. It'll probably come up in the conversation. I think also across this, you can also see how, I know you heard Summer talk about her plans for writing the blueprint and having identified who's accountable for what pieces of this work as well, and we can build that in as we continue to work through this. So financing, accountability, access, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the word promotion and what was considered when the word promotion was used?
So that's usually including between promotion and prevention software, kind of promotional activities often are preventative. Yep. But like strengthening family opportunities, nurse-family partnership, it kind of spans and some intervention, but that's kind of going into the home and home visitation programs.
That was considered part of the safety net, or is that considered continuum?
So I'm sorry if I didn't specify that. These are continuums of behavioral health services broadly. For Virginia's, it was focused on Medicaid recipients and what they were going to include, but they were looking at kind of the holistic needs of Medicaid members and then where Medicaid funding would support versus connections to other supports.
So we had planned for small group discussion related to the continuum and starting to get some feedback from the subcommittee about kind of how we want to move with this. We have not as much time. So I'm hesitant to move into small groups just because it takes more time to do that. So maybe considering some of these questions, because one of the things that I'm grappling with by being completely transparent is if we focus work across the continuum for the subcommittee, if we're agreed that this is a way to kind of organize and prioritize, like where in the continuum would we begin? And so in terms of supporting and scaling what works, thinking about the current state of the Colorado safety net system, knowing that we haven't dug into defining what services fall under these areas, we were just going to have a conversation about what you feel like is working well and where you feel like there's the most opportunities for transformation. And then we're hoping to take that feedback to drive future agendas to really kind of piece this out into bite size instead of the entire projector. So if we can tolerate 10 minutes of that kind of conversation as a large group, I think maybe it would be helpful for us in helping and thinking about how to bite this out moving forward. And then we can move to public comment and we'll be on our way home. Yeah, Summer.
Sorry.
just real quick, I think it's fine to have a larger discussion. What I would just say is clearly we have some really vocal folks in the room and we have folks that are not as vocal. So I just want to make sure to kind of honor our group agreement. If you're one who usually speaks up a lot, maybe challenge yourself to step back. And if you're one who's usually quiet, challenge yourself to step up and make sure that your voice is heard. That's one of the reasons why we have the small group discussions, is to make sure that everyone feels comfortable speaking. Sometimes it's harder for people to do that in a larger group, but definitely want to make sure that everyone feels like they have a chance to weigh in.
I'm open to moving if we can do it quickly.
I think the big group is fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So in considering this, I mean, do you have questions, comments? Do you hate it? Do you think it works? Are there places that you think that are strengths in Colorado already across this continuum? We can kind of take any feedback you have about using this as a model for organizing work moving forward.
I have a question. And because I haven't said anything, don't be fooled that I don't talk. I talk a lot. But I sit back sometimes and just listen. But I have a question about everything we're talking about. I mean, I can see all of this, the words and all that, but what I get afraid of is that everything gets caught up in bureaucracy and no one gets help. And at the end of the day, that happens a lot for the people that we serve. We want them to get help, and a lot of times they don't get help because there's too many layers and levels that they have to go through before they can get to the place that they need to be. So I hope that that doesn't happen again. Then I want to ask a question about doing all of these services. Is there anyone talking about, is anyone in charge of where are all these people going to go? Like, who are they going to see? Part of the problem that I see in my job is that there's no therapists. Where are they? People wait because there are no therapists. Is anyone working on getting therapists? Is there people coming in? Are we going to colleges? Are we recruiting? So this is all great, but if there's no one for them to go see, the same thing, they're going to end up in prison, they're going to end up in probation and jails, because that's the only place that they can go. So that's my question. Do we have people that can provide the services for all these things that we want to do?
It's Clint Gray. Tracy, so I hear, and I agree, is maybe down the road, I wrote it down and say we need to develop providers.
Yeah. Where are
So
they?
that's something that we can put down the road as our list as our goals.
But is that part of our group? Is that something that we need to do? Is that someone else looking at that?
I think we help do it.
We do.
I think we need to plug it into places. So I think it's one of our goals. Is for the part of is how we're going to develop providers. Robert says no.
Or I push back a little bit. It may be, but workforce is a bigger issue than just the safety net system. It's all like there's just a lack of behavioral health specialists, period, in Colorado, which is something maybe that the behavioral health task force needs to take on, is about workforce development. Because even a safety net system is built, whether it's private, government, mix approach, none of those entities have any greater ability to hire, like to create these positions than the other. The workforce development does need to be addressed, and I'm wondering if that's something for the larger behavioral health task force to, we can ask them to take that on. I think we have enough on our plate to talk about what a safety net system looks like and what it should look like. And we can address and identify that workforce is going to be an issue, and we need the behavioral health task force to create a work group to address workforce.
When they address the workforce, can they talk about those additional supports and things that we were talking about, social determinants of health, and as well as attainable housing? Because I know in rural, at least rural, I'll speak rural resort communities, part of the reason we don't have those therapists is because they can't pay community health centers and even trying to be a private provider. You can't make enough money to afford the ridiculous affordable housing that's in our rural resort communities because it's not affordable.
Agreed. I think the workforce will need to address cost of living for workforce. So social determinants of health have no worry. I think we spent the whole first behavioral health task force meeting talking about social determinants of health, and I don't know if we got the behavioral health. So it's a big interest on their end.
More of a process question, and I couldn't see this in the timeline, so forgive me if it's there, but will there be it sounds like what we're talking about is an opportunity to comment on what's needed to actualize the vision and what the barriers are to that. We might not be able to address all of that, but making sure that those are noted clearly, is that part of?
So I will say, developing a workforce, I think is another work group. What the workforce is a question. Who the workforce is something that this group should address, because it does get into, I don't want it to be law enforcement. I'm sure most people here don't want it to be law enforcement or jails. I mean, to the point that Colorado had to pass a law saying that jails are not a behavioral health provider in the sense of if you don't have a criminal charge, you're not going to jail. I mean, we had to pass a law. That's crazy, right? So I think we can get, and then peers and other components of when we talked about the continuum, when I think about parts of this continuum, the highest, I mean, there are different types of people who can provide different expertise and do some parts better than others, and peers and things like that are things that we should keep in our mind when we talk about service delivery and who provides those services. I think who provides it is a critical part of the we have to answer. Who is that's going to provide those services?
I guess this is Carl Farrow. I wanted to actually speak about something that's going well. I think in Colorado we're either starting to or we are using peers well. I think that they are both like effective and useful type of provider, also more cost effective. So maybe I guess that's something I think is going well and should continue to be built on for Safety Net.
Thanks for saying something positive.
I was just going to say that I agree in terms of, I think we need to be more flexible in terms of what we consider to be the workforce. I think there's there are a lot of people out there who have interest in and a desire to participate and give back in the behavioral health field, but we're so rigid about the categories and the licensure and those pieces that we lose a lot of good people, which also means that we need to work with payers to understand that those services should be reimbursed and that those professionals can be really well trained and do a significant good in the community and should be paid for. And then in terms of the good part, it's hard to look at these and say that there's one that's going perfectly well. I think there's pockets of each of these in various communities or places where you see it going well. I guess I'm most encouraged by some of the ideas that I hear. I feel like people know what the problems are. There's a genuine desire across the state to improve things. There's people coming together to try to work on solutions. And it feels like a genuine intention to do things differently. So I feel very encouraged by that. And some of the things I'm hearing about in other communities that haven't yet taken form in my community seem like people have really come up with some great strategies. So I'm encouraged.
So I am also a huge proponent of using peers in the system. I do think we have a lot of ways we need to address how we use peers. For instance, how are we allowing peers to be reimbursed, where they can only be reimbursed in a facility. A lot of peers work in, I kind of hate the words non-traditional or alternative settings. I think those settings should be just as acceptable as any, but making sure that peers can be reimbursed and at a rate that gives them a living wage. Like I know most peers end up still being on disability or other services because they can't afford to live on the wages they're making. But in regard to peers and just non-clinical services, I don't really like that we have treatment as that's the only piece of, that's that entire part of the continuum. I think services is a better word. Not everyone needs clinical treatment as to get to the recovery point, and alternative services that are non-clinical are really, really important to have. Certain people will not do well in clinical services, just period. They're not going to find wellness or recovery through clinical services. I'm a person who benefits from clinical services, but not everyone does. And I think we need to include those folks if it's actually a safety net, because those are usually the folks that have the least amount of access to what actually works well for them.
Can you give some examples?
Well, for instance, in the Eagle County continuum, the listed providers, it was all clinical providers as opposed to peers. Peers provide crisis services all over the world. In Georgia, they have 6, the state has bought into 6 different, I believe it's 6 peer respite systems that provide crisis care that's completely voluntary, based in mutuality and shared decision making. It does not require any sort of clinical oversight, and it is not a clinical space, but people who go through those systems generally stay better longer. We have some semi-peer respites in Colorado, but we do not have any true 100% peer run respites, and we need that. Other states have them, they work very well. There's a lot of wonderful evidence for those, but every time I brought them up in previous situations, I feel like they're not taken seriously as an option. If we want people to stay well for a long time in a cost-effective manner, peer respites are a really great option, but it looks as though peers are only included in the aftercare piece. Peers should be every step along the way, and not just peers, but other non-clinical services. Not everyone needs clinical services. A lot of people will never engage in clinical services, and those are often people who don't find recovery or wellness because there's nothing available to them that works well. And yeah, I didn't like, this feels very medical. It does not feel like a system that tends towards recovery, or a continuum that does.
I think that Emma is waving at me, somebody on the phone wanted to jump in.
I thought I saw a little hand go up, but then it disappeared before I could chat to them. But you could pause and see if anyone wants
Anyone
to.
on the phone wanted to jump in, unmute? All right, this is really, really valuable conversation, and then we will certainly continue. I just want to make sure we're at 10 till that I go to public comment, and if we don't have any, we'll come back. But if I don't do this now, I might not get done, and members of the public have taken the time to join us today, so I just want to make sure we save some time if you have questions or comments for the subcommittee.
I have a comment. My name is Margaret Elmer. I'm the president of NAMI Colorado, and I would like to make a comment that it distresses me a great deal to hear the group attempt to define out who would be served by the safety net, because as we've seen over and over in NAMI, you just don't know who might end up needing to be caught by that safety net. It happens regularly, a great deal. So a safety net needs to be there to serve anybody who is struck by a mental health condition. That's the nature of brain-based illnesses and conditions, that it can affect your ability to manage your own life, and it happens extremely frequently. And my take on how this is perceived by people who work in the system is that this happens to contain a bottomless well of need, and I don't think it needs to be like that. And I think in order to serve both the people and the public as a whole, it's doable, but we need to be thinking outside the box, as was originally stated at the beginning of this effort. Thanks.
Thank you. Any others?
My name is John Seeley. I'm a psychiatrist. I've worked in the Denver area for about 14 years. I just want a few comments about my experience working in community mental health. I've done inpatient work, ER work, and community mental health. There's issues regarding both access and then the existence of services. The access part, the things that I've seen the most are people that have private insurance finding any provider that actually takes their insurance. Whereas patients that have no insurance, Medicaid or Medicare, that are eligible for community mental health, the access issue is more, how quickly can they get in or not. So I think there's issues of both access and availability. As far as actual services in the community, the biggest concern I have as a psychiatrist is that I work with patients with severe mental illness like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder, psychotic features. I've gone to court to get them on quarter meds when they've been very ill, born inside and disorganized thinking, and got them stable. Sometimes it takes weeks or months. And then when they leave the hospital, there's no availability for residential care for people who are recovered from a psychotic episode. I think that should be a very high priority for the safety net community to make sure that when people have a psychotic episode and they're in the hospital, that when they leave the hospital, they have access to residential care, regardless if they're uninsured, have Medicaid, Medicare, or private insurance. Thank you.
My name is Nita Bradford, and I, like Mark Ritter, with NAMI Colorado, and have been for almost 40 years when it started. So I've known hundreds of people, including my own son, and I just want to. I was startled to see that it was that when we talked about who will we serve, that was not where I expected to start, because as the second one, Margaret said it a little different way, as any one person will be in that category. So you can't decide who will we serve if you're going to wait until those terrible conditions. You listed the worst kinds of conditions that people might need the safety net. And I will tell you that one reason I'm still in NAMI all these decades is because my son eventually, here in Colorado, with services and with everything we did for NAMI to help, was at some point, if I were to look at those, I could check off a number of them that he was. Right now, he's really healthy. He's married, he owns his own business, he has 3 daughters who just graduated from college. It took years to get there. It took services that were provided in Colorado that doesn't happen now. And they weren't just treatments. It was things that were designed to raise them. So the point is, this group, I think, needs to do is find how do we keep people from getting into those worst situations. They will fall there, but they can get out, maybe in a month, maybe in a year, maybe in 10 years or 12. But I thought that this group was going to be focusing, and I'm so appreciative for all the things you said. It was just really, it was encouraging to hear all the things that people were saying and bringing together different viewpoints. But my understanding was that we're going to look at a statewide system that's going to keep people from falling into those categories, or if they fall into them, which they will at some point, for many cases, they're lifted up, and you don't stop serving them once they get out of those terrible situations. Keep them afloat. So I appreciate this group and all that you're doing. Thank you.
All right, thank you for sharing your comments and thanks for taking the time to be here. We have 5 minutes left, so I know there were a couple of other comments on the other side of the room that we can shift back to. I don't know who had their hand up over here.
It was me, and I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what Aubrey was saying in relation to the, if you look at the Virginia, they've outlined the recovery services under there, and if you look at some of the things that they have listed, and we think about it from a perspective in the continuum of care, that supportive services for the persistently mentally ill folks sometimes, that tend to be a little bit non-traditional. It's not necessarily just like therapy, but like clubhouse services or psychosocial rehab or the supportive housing, vocational services, things that get people like wrapped in services and not just, again, traditional therapy, but supports them and moving forward in their lives, and being able to be constructive and participate in their lives. So I do think that that's an important piece, even if it's just, I'm sorry, the gentleman from the veterans, Carl, said earlier, even if it's just making sure that we're putting emphasis on that kind of connection and referring and making those services available or an understanding of how those services are available, I do agree with you that we need to focus on some non-traditional service arrays as well.
This is Allison George. On that note, I'll just add a couple things. What's really worked, partnered with our housing programs, are the ACT teams to provide that wraparound support for folks in community. I think when talking about supportive housing and people being successful in supportive housing, there's a little bit of a push to move people to less supportive situations when they're stable. But one of my concerns is when people are comfortable in community and they have their supports, that they maintain that. So something that we're looking at as well are things that we call tenancy supports. So it's a lighter touch. We actually did a lean effort with OPH, thank you, Camille, and TikTok actually, where we really looked at what are those things that are not necessarily billable through the traditional systems, but provide that support to really ensure someone is stable in their housing. And it can be as simple as coffee in the morning and access to a person to talk to. So looking at what those things are, and so that will be a part of the library information that's provided. But it is very successful in supporting people in community.
So we keep going back to the whole holistic person, which I think is absolutely great and the right thing to do. I'm just thinking strategy as far as how we address those things without addressing both, basically all the related social determinants, but also not losing. There's fixes to the actual behavioral health services too. So what is do we parking lot the social determinants to make sure we address them? I'm trying to think out what the group thinks they want to do. Get into behavioral health services first and then get into social determinants, think about how it fits, things like tenancy supports and other things, or I don't know, I'm open to ideas. I do want to note, thank you for the public testimony. I think it's helpful. I think it reinforces the group's decision to go with all our audience. I appreciate that. There was a thing in public testimony that I see, at least from my job, is interruption in care is consistent, whether it's because of payer source or because of changing of status of housing or it's changing of. So how do we build a system that is not going to be interrupted by other elements? The care is not going to be interrupted. So it really is meeting the client where they are versus the client coming to us. But that doesn't just mean physical space. That also means conditions on funding, requirements that we have for some housing, right? Different things like that. That I think this group does need to consider those things. Make sure our safety net system is fluid enough that it can work with where that client's at versus where we require them to be in order to get the services.
So, Melissa Edelman, HICPUF, I'm not naive enough to think we're going to solve the housing crisis.
Yeah.
Even for just folks contending with behavioral health issues. I would say, however, that we would be remiss if we look at a system where there have been efforts, and like HICPUF is working on this right now, and we're looking at some things with DOLA as well, additional like grant funds and things like that. There are services that are out there that we have not well connected. And if we take a person that's coming out of a hospital situation and hand them a housing voucher and don't put supportive housing services around them to make sure that they stay healthy, or that we're thinking that these folks are going to just show up at a community mental health center and that maybe we don't need to go send someone to knock on their door occasionally, then I think we're naive and we're not fixing the system. So I do think that we need to kind of break down our traditional understanding of how some of this works and then figure out how to do it better. And I think, some of like the places that have been able to do this well, and like countries have like radically dismantled their systems and their traditional ways of thinking and how they fund things. So I think we need to be a little radical.
We are out of time. And so Lauren, I don't want to cut you off and I'll let you go, but I'm going to give you 30 seconds and then we're going to move on. But I want to say that that's music to my ears. And I think that's what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what's already out there, what's working, what's not working, what are the gaps, what are the redundancies, and then Summer's going to write this blueprint that's going to sell it all. Okay. Then I want the minutes and the slides will be posted. The handouts that are not in some weird Mac explosion will be available to you. Our next meeting is in 2 weeks. It's going to be on the Anschutz Medical campus in a really weird room. I'm just going to warn you now. It's the best we could find. It's the School boardroom. It's in the pharmacy building. It's kind of this roundabout. It's this round auditorium. So be prepared to be wowed by pharmacy. And then we'll continue with these meetings on first and third Thursdays through infinity, through June. Yeah.
I just want to add real quick, one of the people online, Eva online just added, I just want to point out to everyone, you should probably have it on your calendar. We are offering public testimony opportunities where family members and people with experience can come and share their stories, especially to the executive committee members who are hosting these. And all members of the subcommittees and task force are encouraged to be there in person, to listen in online. Eva, who is one of your subcommittee members who's online, just said that she just encourages everyone to at least listen in. It's hard to hear, but really powerful. And just a good reminder of why we're all here doing this hard work.
I think that's it. I got you out a couple minutes late. I'm sorry. Have a good weekend. Are we at the weekend? No.
Sure.